So what was the idea is that there's a saying attributed to the first Dalai Lama that goes, learn the rules really well so that when you're ready, you can break them properly. Now I was coming in to bring this around to Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzatto. We've been using his full name. He's usually just called the RACMCHAL, which is his initials, Rabbi Moshe Chayim Luzatto, the RACMCHAL, who, again, just for cohesiveness, this is the man who was born somewhere in late 1600s, early 1700s, lived till about 1740. Actually, if it was 1740, which I believe it was, and he was born in 1707. Anyway, so this is his idea that the mitzvahs, actually he points to an open piece of the Talmud in Kedushin, a section of the Talmud that says that it would have been better for Klal Yisrael, for the congregation of Israel, to have never received the Torah at Sinai. And the idea is these are sort of crutches or helpful algorithmic processes as a methodical discipline to, as any alchemical system, develop and cultivate consciousness to a point that it becomes like dissolvable stitching. It should just disintegrate. So the point is kind of like a crustacean that molts. There's an evolution that's meant to go on here. Fine, you had a Eureka, you couldn't be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and just perceive. So here's this, do this together, have an aggregate collective upgrading of your system and, klal prat, congregation, the whole collection and your individual, all hopefully moving somewhat wheels in synchronization. And now, eventually, these training wheels they're just gonna fly off. You're not gonna need them anymore. So we've long entered into this period, even according to the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, this authority I mentioned. And by the way, just to tie that together, the Vilna Gaon himself said, had I lived a generation earlier, I would have walked on foot. He was in Lithuania. He said, I would have walked on foot from Lithuania, down to Milan, Italy, to learn at the feet of the RACMCHAL. Now, this is a more known individual, the Vilna Gaon, widely accepted as the greatest authority of his generation, monumental in stature and application of a title that some said, oh, he's a Tana, this level of authority that goes back to the writers of the Mishnah. Some said, no, he's a little less, he's an Amora, but you had or at least a Rishon, like he was considered an Ochrod, Rishon, like the first generation of the modern generation, or the later, who's supposed to be a later, but they put him at this like Rishon or Amora or Tana, and some were like Navi and said Malach is just like essentially like an angel level. And this guy, who they put all those accolades on, even if none of them are technically correct, it's the esteem they had for this man, the way it was viewed. And he himself said, I would have walked all the way from Lithuania, from Vilna and Lita, all the way to Milan, Italy. So he put the RACMCHAL far above himself, this man who everybody put so high. And yet in his place, during his lifetime, the RACMCHAL was mistreated entirely. But then the next generation, the Vilna Gaon, who everybody esteemed, said, no, this material, this man was on a whole level higher than me. And so the way he could catalog this material, and so he was bringing out this idea that the point of the Torah was only to be this dissolvable bandage, this dissolvable stitching. It was meant to disintegrate, to expire. The training wheels come off. Like, you shouldn't have even needed them, but now that you did, And the Vilna Gaon was saying himself said that we had entered into this period. He made a statement brought down that few do not adhere to in the system that exalted, the system that puts him on this pedestal. They put him on this pedestal, but then they don't look at what he actually said. And what he actually said about this generation is that this old way of processing was on the way out, of mostly focusing on the ground level dictums of Talmudic study. He said, well, actually, this generation is mechayev, it's obligated to engage in Kabbalistic, at all the restrictions, all the previous limitations were off. He even brought in very strongly, he said, if you're not, you're chayav misa, you should be put to death. It said anybody over 18 should be fully increasing the messianic energy by engaging these topics. And that was the Vilna Gaon, and he said these extremely highly esteemed statements about the RACMCHAL. So you take these work together, and the RACMCHAL's point is we're entering into a period where, or we've entered, we're there. This is 300 years later, whole other cycle that we don't need these things anymore. So disregarding the fact that we've gone through thousands, if not thousands upon thousands, manifold thousands of cycles. It's like we've done this. We did it. We've done it. We did it. We've done this doing. And now it's like the ego is invested, like this is part of our identity. We've got to keep doing this. We've got to keep doing it. It's like, no. You became matured and advanced in this cultivation, but now you must return to being the child. Just release. You've arrived. So it's sort of like that phenomena, that like micro phenomena where you're walking up a bunch of stairs and you're not really paying attention. You attempt to take an extra stair and your body learns just sort of like, oh, or it's bad if you're like going down the stairs, you try to slam one more. But now picture doing that. Your destination was some beach in sunny Florida, and you've arrived. You've been there for a couple of days, maybe a week, but you're still trying to get there. What are you doing? So we've arrived, but the consciousness is so far lagged behind. It needs to jog forward. Like you've arrived. We are. We need a big sign in the mall for everybody. We are here. You're muted there, Dr. Dave. But we're here. So it's they're very hard-headed. Like, yes, we've come, there's a fear around it, but it's like all these mitzvahs, all this, it was to bring conscious realization to a point. And while the individual here and an individual there may still be way far behind, the aggregate awareness has reached a cumulative accretion, a point of accretion where we've arrived. Like now you're not just in your job day after day planning that tropical getaway vacation, like, and now you're sitting on the beach, but you're still at the job, like, and it's gonna be like, you're there. You're actually on the beach with your family, watching the waves and feeling the tropical air. But it's almost like still like, oh, when I get there, you're there. This is an issue. It's like we've arrived, but everybody's so discombobulated with amnesia that they don't realize we're here. And therefore, in the parlance of this Kabbalistic parlance, or in this genuine, real concern, so we're not really here. We can't really be here until everybody shows up with the acknowledgement or the realization, a realized state of conscious awareness that we're here. And until that happens in critical mass, it's like we're not. So even those of us who have arrived or acknowledged the point of arrival, the quality of experience is still trash because it can't fully be sustained that bliss and beauty and the appreciation of this arrival until a critical mass acknowledges and checks in. So for those who have gotten to this side, it's still kind of a downer because we're like, okay, waiting for the rest to show up. So in that Aramaic, Sitra is a side, Achra is the other, and we call this force that's hanging around in here, this film, this filth, the Sitra Achra, the other side. It's this other thing, and that goes really deep into why that exists. But it's this othering, and the goal is that othering stop and not need to other itself or make itself a foreigner, an alien, some outsider in the outer, like, it's just being weird. It's just being a weirdo. Like, that's not necessary. This is a singular body and you don't need to other yourself. So this is populated, this otherness populates in the soul as a character in the human form. And it's this thing that's causing these rifts. Anyway, that's the Sitra Achra, back to the beginning where we began. You got on mute.
But the othering isn't neutral. It's not just passive, or it's not just a mistake. It's somehow perpetuating itself.
You want to get into that?
Well, I mean, I want to say that I feel like for myself, I'm doing okay. If I'm making Shabbos at my house, my singing and my spirit is messianic. But somehow when I go to somewhere else, to the rabbi's table, it doesn't, I can't achieve the same. I think that's what you were saying, the same level of insight.
Okay, so to bring this back to a universality for everybody. So you're saying, if I'm by myself in my room, I cleaned my room. The spirit, the energy in my room is happy and uplifted, inspiring, and the wholeness of consciousness is alive and well. But if I go out to a group that's not on this wave frequency yet, then it becomes tattered and scattered, and it's not so pleasant.
Right.
And especially if you take it an additional step and say, this is ostensibly an environment or circumstance that should be, at least ostensibly, it is alleging to be a place where that spirit should be welcome, if not well cultivated and present, and it's a void. And if you sometimes bring the intensity of the frequency you generated in your room there, it's like, ah! But it's supposed to be a place that's conducive and welcoming to that spirit, and yet it doesn't know from that spirit.
It doesn't know, right.
So that's peculiar. On its face, it's peculiar. But that might get into a little bit about what's this other thing. It's not exactly a mistake. It's a more so a necessary byproduct of our putting this relationship, creationship experiment in motion. It was a thing. If this path was chosen, as it clearly did, our original state of being, we're a collective singularity, or singularity decided to do this thing. The byproduct of that is how to do this thing, and doing this thing produced an effect that trickles down and eventually becomes the Sitra Achra. It's a necessary byproduct of this decision that was made to put this thing in motion. It's not a mistake. It's just a consequence. Now, this consequence has detrimental effects that need to be counteracted and neutralized and brought into integration, or the same thing that put ourselves in motion will put ourselves into everlasting entropy. So we needed this cyclonic spin, this centrifugal chaos to promote ourselves into motion to get this thing rolling. But it also needs to be extinguished. It needs to be assimilated, or the same thing that put us in business will put us out of business or into a different business. Instead of the business of becoming, it'll be the business of fragmenting, unending fragmentation. It's like it was supposed to take us up to here, but if we go past there, then that's just entropy and breakdown, everlasting breakdown. That's the nature of infinity, is how much the number one or a container can shatter ceaselessly. So if we go past what Kabbalah calls the 150th gate of Tuma, this place where if you have a photo and you're making photocopies of the photo, eventually the pixelation gets spread out so far you can never remember how to, and we're at that point where it's the do the thing or you did it, and that's our collective decision. We're gonna remember, we're gonna cooperate, we're gonna come into a permanent state of messianic consciousness, this high vibrational frequency that comes and goes for most. We're just gonna end up there together in full color spectrum, or we're gonna lose it forever. Like that's the make or break it moment that we're experiencing. We can go much more carefully through each stage of this and why it's consequential and inevitable that this is precisely how it has to be, and it is this way, and it functionally translates into each stage of our development, and it's discernible in the world as it's experienced now if you're careful with inspecting it. You don't take the wrong turns and this wrong turn and that plateau and go hang out with this religion and that wisdom system, and you're stuck at this little finard of that and that little twist of that. And no, just we're past being stuck in those things, but many still are. But this is where it's not theory. This is where this isn't philosophy. It's what we say is lamaisa. It's a matter of direct consequential concern in the now. The now. This is like our now is sorting this out collectively together, and it matters. So this module of agreeing to disagree, it's just not shayef. It's not acceptable, because there is a definite answer needed to be resolved to by the individuals involved, and it's just beyond the point of conjunction where that needs to be reached with a sense of collective clarity. And it's attainable. I mean, that's a big thing to come out of this solipsistic perception where like, oh, it's just not. No, it's attainable. You just have to be patient. And nature, the Holy Spirit, the highlighter in the video, it's all prone to giving it into your hands if you're patient, just a little more patient. This clarity is attainable. It is able to be achieved. And that's the first foundation. That's the first fundamental that must be adhered to, is that it is attainable, it can be achieved, and that can be done together. And we can come to we're required to come to a resolution about these things. And it's not so far out of hand.
Great.
Super.
Great.
You're very clever about getting me to talk a lot by saying a little.
Yeah, I'm a good interviewer.
It's almost like you were just doing it with silent signal.
Well, it's maddening in a way, because what do they say? When everybody's insane, then the sane person will be accused of being insane. They'll all point to that person and say, you're crazy. And it's like everybody's playing this really primitive game. And there's such a much more exciting entertaining, fulfilling experience to be had.
If they only
And
knew they were missing.
huh?
If they only knew what they were missing out on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just all going out to dinner. It's like, well, how many times can you do that? How much fun is that? If you go out to dinner 4 or 5 times a week, it's not even fun anymore. It's,
Been there, ate that.
yeah, it's just eating. It's not.
And it's reckless. And if you watch, it's reckless eating. And then life is treated like everything that's being done. It's just reckless eating. So there's an idea in a more visceral level of Kabbalah where they say, now that's I was going to cover that back in the beginning. Kabbalah, the Hebrew word Kabbalah means to receive. So this is received information from the great field, the Holy Spirit, the aggregate cloud of information, sometimes referred to in certain circles as the astral or the Akashic. So to receive, Kabbalah means to receive. That's what it means. It does not mean mysticism, because if you were to ask a mystic, they don't like me. I think to the mystic, this stuff is not mystical. To the mystic, this stuff is calculus. It's the total antithesis of misty and mystical. That is the perception of somebody who has no clue what's going on. They see the prodigal wizard doing that, or able to influence nature, influence the minds of the individuals, and matter. And there's that's a mystery, because they're in a mist, they're in a fog, they're in brain fog, they're in mental fog. To them, it's foggy, it's misty, it's mystical. I'm mystified. To the individual doing it, there's no mystical. It's a calculated process. It's a disciplined, trained method, much like a martial art. There's a procedure to all of it, and it's high calculus, calculation, algebra. There's rudiments at every stage. So Kabbalah is not mysticism, but it is to receive. It is to be makabel on the cable. There's a reception involved in being connected to a higher source of information that shows you schematics, diagrams, how to augment magical circumstance and be in the best and the most optimal manner of dealing with the reality. So it's not mysticism. That's a misnomer. And those who engage in this art and discipline don't really care to be called mystics. That's from the point of view of the idiot. Like, it's mystical. It's not, it's work. It's hard work. It's deliberate and precise, acute use of all sorts of knowledge, translated into hopefully into a grounded and efficient daily bunch of tasks and actions that lead to ideal results or less, but that's the experimentation process of discovery. So we're talking about all these Kabbalists and Kabbalah and keep saying the word. That was the other word besides Sitra Achra in the beginning that I felt it was important to define and lost track of, but we got there. So that's
very good. Very good. So Well, I guess that's pretty well describes Luzatto. Did you finish your point about the Bodhisattva? I mean, you explained it very.
It was an aside. It was to say there are things, where Buddhism came out from the Vedantic culture through Siddhartha Gautama classically, and that where Siddhartha himself stopped, later continued to develop and amalgamate a lot of the Nepalese shamanic notions, which like the Bodhisattva is a very useful notion. And then Buddhism itself continued to travel on to these Asiatic countries and like Japan, and you have Pure Land, it's the mainland, Pure Land on the mainland, Pure Land and Theravada, these more classical Buddhist forms that don't involve themselves with many of these extra features that specifically Tibetan Buddhism holds, because as it progressed, it began to integrate and assimilate many of the Nepalese shamanic notions. The Bodhisattva was an example along the path as we were getting over to bringing up this statement attributed to the first Dalai Lama about being able to know all the strictures and rules and parameters, so you're ready to break through that wall, break on through this side. But it was just something I picked up along the path to mention because it's helpful later. There's a lot of thumbtacks that could be explored in more
future episodes.
So even if we're attempting to do Remedial 85 or at least the 101 class, we're already giving the 505 class, but you're attempting to keep me from jumping into the doctorate level. But I believe that fixing this around the character of RACMCHAL Chayim Luzatto is a good anchored jumping off point. It's a good launch point to bring up a lot of these topics, which are just broadly relevant, but he was a good point of focus in this particular niche community. And their core is sort of, it's populated in the mind of the entire world. And that ultimately takes the shape for most of the world, Christianity populating the Old Testamental notions in their, more limited way of knowing them, stories and fables and things that mostly are just now background trapping to get to the lap of Jesus. Who have, of course, that's a false name. That's a combining of two Citraachric forces, which are in Zeus and Isis, and it's part of some kind of internal gear-based apparatus. That's fine, but when they became exalted as these independent gods, it became very problematic. They became very filth-oriented, and in and of themselves, they just refer to some gears and parts of the big machine. But when they became given enough thought energy, this thought form, that they became worshipped, they became problematic. So as a name, it picks up a J in Germany later. It came out as, Isis, Zeus, Jesus, but it's just a strange, there is a humor, a divine cosmic code there, which has to do with reproduction. If you hear it, you hear it. I'm not saying it today because we're not there. But as names go, there's a segment that was just done with my wife Kamaliana concerning the name Joshua. Why at least we could step to Joshua. I'm not even sure if I spoke it out fully in that segment, but there's a book called the Septuagint, and in the conventional narrative, this happened during the Greek period, often called by academia the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Israel area. So this Greek ruler, Antiochus, one of them, Epiphanes, one of them, he decided that I believe there were 5 Antiochi. One of the Antiochus, these are just previous. These are just after Alexander the Great and the dividing up of the empire. These were Seleucids, I believe. The Seleucid part of the division is Macedonia, Seleucid, Ptolemaic. There were these divisions of the Greek Empire after Alexander's death. Classical history, whatever, classical narrative of the convention. Anyway, so one of the Antiochus he decided he wanted to mock this Torah tradition and say it was a bunch of hoo-ha. So, but he also wanted access to what he felt might be not the way it was portrayed as something supernal, but that they had secrets in some capacity that could be used as dark psychology or access to internal physics of finance, how to better his political position, all these things he felt were contained in these secrets that he couldn't get access to because the Torah was in Hebrew. And he insisted, or maybe it was in some Targum in Aramaic, like even that came a little later. So he wanted access to it, translated it to the Greek language. So he took 70 rabbis. So there's multiple things going on simultaneously. He wanted to be able to act like this isn't going to work. I'm going to prove that there's no supernatural quality to this. And meanwhile, I'm going to get some kind of a Greek rendering of this Hebrew text I can get access to that I feel might hold some brain-based hardware, software kind of stuff to best get advantage over humans in my political station. So he put 70 rabbis in 70 different places. That's why the book is called the Septuagint. In Greek, that means 70, the 70. He put it 70 rabbis. This is at least the story. This is at least the narrative. Put 70 rabbis, 70 different places. And the so-called nace or miracle about this is that all 70 rabbis, disconnected without a prior communication or evaluation of this, they all chose exactly the same equivalent Hebrew to Greek word. So the Greek word they chose for the known Hebrew, they all chose for thousands of words in the Torah. They all chose the same Hebrew to Greek equivalent. Anyway, that's a little background on what the Septuagint is. So it became this certifiable Greek translation of the Hebrew that this is going back. And in there you have Joshua, the right hand of Moses, Joshua ben Nun, Joshua the fish, the guy who brought down the walls of Jericho. He's translating them there from the Hebrew Yehoshua, Yeshua, Joshua, to Yeshua in the Greek. So this business of transliterating names, or transforming a name, is a little nasty to begin with, because what's the name? Well, name, if your name was, Dobson, like that's your name, where you're from. Now you come here, you're still Dobson. You don't need to suddenly become, well, I'm in America, so now I'm David. Like, what? No, you're still Dobson. So it's a little strange, this trend, but the British were really motivated in this rename game. They like to do it with countries. It's a form of acclamation and dominance and bringing you to this program. You get it, okay? It makes its own sense in a way if you want to acculturate that thing that you now appropriated. Anyway, so there, if you're taking things like John, the Apostle John, is like, well, that was a guy living in first century Judea. His name was Yochanan. This one, actually, because you got John, the guy who wrote the book of Revelation, out of Patmos, or Patmos, the island of Patmos, and then you've got John the Immerser. Yochanan, that's the Tivoli. I actually realized I already backwards. The guy, John the Baptist, right? So that guy's name was Yochanan, actually. And I said this wrong, but the apostle wasn't Yochanan. The apostle was Yonasan. So those are actually two different names. That John was a Yonasan, and that John was a Yochanan. Anyway, so I'm just using this as an example. So this Yochanan becomes John. Okay, and this Yonasan becomes John. All right, John, whatever. So that's this transforming of a name to this culture. So for instance, we were talking about these fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Yitzchak, and Jacob, Yaakov. Right. So then you have, for instance, like an extra step, you've got the Apostle James in the book of James in the New Testament. Well, that was the book, at least it was the book of Jacob until King James came along, King James Bible guy, King James, and he said, oh, well, his name is my name too, John Jacob Jingleheimer, what the F. And so he took Jacob and it became James. But the reality is the guy's actual way of identifying himself in the market then would have been Yaakov. He would have been the brother, the younger brother of the guy Jesus who we're talking about, the younger brother, you know, Mary and Joseph's second round of children. The twins, Yaakov and Yehuda, or Yehudith, if it was a girl, maybe. Anyway, the book of Jude, not Judas Iscariot. There's James and Jude, twins. So Yaakov and Yehudi. Anyway, so you take that over. Yaakov becomes Jacob, becomes James. But now, like, so that's just the standard model. But now we've got something that's completely, we've got this one-off with James and King James, but then there's a real weird one, Jesus. Like, I'm not even weighing in on the stories or the variety. I'm just looking at just the pieces and parts and the mechanics involved here. What is that? Because you open the New Testament to the Koine Greek and it says Iesua, just like in that book that we just talked about a lot, the Septuagint, it says Iesua. So we already know. Iesua is either in the columns, it's either Yehoshua, which is the correct Hebrew, or Joshua. What the F is Jesus? So why is it that the standardized certified version of the Septuagint from Yehoshua to Yeshua to Joshua, and we've got Yeshua in the New Testament, it should be Joshua. What is this Jesus? Oh, well, you realize has a lot to do with this dimension of Emperor Constantine in Rome usurping a whole bunch of this for his political gain. After the Greeks, then the Romans played this game. What can I exploit, opportunistically gain from this? Comes down, gets up into Germany. You've got a binding of some gods people are used to in the empire to make better on his stance with them. Oh, bind Zeus and Isis, Jesus, Isus, picks up a J in Germany, Jesus. That's not in there. That's not even in their book. That's not even in the New. It's Yehoshua, and it's not Yeshua for the Messianic Jew strange people. They insist on using a proper noun, Yeshua, which is liberation or moksha in the Sanskrit, or Yehoshua, which is a name. I'm not sure why they insist on that, but they do. They want to say Yeshua. Well, Yeshua is a noun. That's nobody's name. Nobody's name is Yeshua. That's a noun. So this may seem tedious, but getting our words in order. There's a whole level on the ground where we're dealing with this now too. Like there's a human, there's an individual. That's not a person. A person is a term in Black's Law Dictionary. A person is a business. So we've been conditioned in our standard English down here in the matrix construct to just say, so I'm a person, you're a person, we're all good person people. Like, no, a person means a business. And while it may sound pedantic or tedious or excessive, no, we need to use words correctly when the words matter. Some things are just synonymous and it's fine. And some things have very specific meanings. We need to be careful with that. So person is a business. It's people, there's an individual, there's a human, but a person is a business. So just pointing that one out, because that one comes up all the time. Yeah, it's a personal matter. I mean, it's a private matter that deals with, me. But, well, I mean, is there anybody? What was that all about? Well,
Names.
renaming.
I understood that the word Jesus was also a acronym for Yamach Shemo Uzichrono.
Well, there's something entirely different in later rabbinic speaking, because of the adversity that many from the Roman emperor brought upon them in the name of this godified version that the Romans made of a guy who's really just acting like a Messiah figure in the Jewish world. But later, the Roman godifying him into this, and what that brought upon them, they had an acronym Yeshu. It still nothing to do with Jesus. That was from them saying his name was Yehoshua. They shrunk him to Yeshu, which is Yamak Shemot.
Ah,
Yeah. But that's still not an explanation of why it's, because it doesn't make sense. Even in their terms, they should call the man Joshua, because that's the equivalency. So if you're going to be translating Yaakov, the brother of Jude, into James and Jacob, then that guy should certainly be Joshua, because we've already got a precedent. We've got a precedent that Yeshua becomes Joshua in English. So that's an anomaly with an anomaly. What? It doesn't add up. So when things don't add up inside the construct, you know something's highlighted, like a shopkeeper's shop is saying like, loud, highlighted, pay attention. This is something you need to look. There's a big red flag here. Like, whatever they're saying about this guy is probably inside out, upside down, inverted, and contradictory, because that doesn't add up. So it's calling your attention to it. It's not saying it's so much more special, that's why it's got a weird one. It's like, no. If it's that abnormal, you probably need to go and realize that everything about it's been set upside down. So, for instance, since we're there, and let's keep going, it's this whole Constantinian thing where in the narrative conveyance, Emperor Constantine of Rome had this major brain-gasm, moment where he realized, oh, I could take this nugget, this little composite thing from Israel over here, and I could work with that. And I could use this as a brilliant political maneuvering, this is just standard knowledge, that to make pagan aspects of my empire feel more acclimated to the Roman takeover by migrating pagan elements into this neat little nugget over here, and then everybody can just sort of become, involved in that. So this instance of this sterile pagan man god that Christianity worships in a diaper on a cross today, like, that doesn't reflect the actuality described in the New Testament at all, actually. And it's a perversion brought about by Emperor Constantine, because in no way is the man even described, whether he fulfilled his messianic duty or not, saying he was in the standardized version vernacular that we hear, God. That's just retarded, and that's never been stated. But it did work for Emperor Constantine, and this idea of a conception that was based on a woman getting some sort of God seed in her. Yeah, that's not really in that book either. That's all fudged in. And but that was the reality for Mithras, Zoroaster, Attis of Troy, Horus, all these sterile pagan man gods born on December 25th. That's an astrotheological statement of the literal sun. However, if we're going to use that book, which the whole world is obsessed with, called the New Testament, the birthday of the man who's highlighted in that story is labeled in the beginning of the book of Matthew and Luke. It would be the 15th of Tishrei, because the family Kohas, the priestly family Kohas, was serving. You go to the book of Chronicles and find out, oh, they only served during the festival of Sukkot. So the actual birthday is labeled, listed, and that's not really that important, except to say December 25th is completely a farce, which most people who have looked into the matter at all know. And that is a force of will by Emperor Constantine to blend a bunch of pagan sterile man god stuff from the disparate parts of the empire so that they would all sort of get along in one tapestry brought together for his political machinations of being the grand emperor of a much wider swath of geography. But it happens to have corrupted this New Testament story. It's just wrong. This whole manger situation where everybody was outside. Yeah, it was Sukkot. So they were all outside in Sukkot. That's why Nobody was staying in the inn. Nobody was taking rooms in the inn because it was the Festival of Tabernacles. And people were out putting up a commemorative tabernacle from their time in the desert. That's what Jews do on the 15th of Tishrei in the first century in Israel. So they were all out with the animals building their little tabernacle remembrance ceremony ritual. And yeah, it's very clear it was the 15th of Tishrei that in the family Kohath was serving. Eventually, Moses' brother Aaron's great-grandchildren down the line, they were eventually 52, and somehow it was decided this is probably a good moment to seal this thing and say, look, there's 52 of them, so each of these families are going to service a week of the year, and that's how it became in David's temple, that you have these 52, great-grandchild families of the man Aaron, Moses' brother, who got the priestly office during the incident of the golden calf. That's the narrative in the Torah goes. They got this. That was their prize for being good about that. They got to have the priestly office. And eventually, down the line, there was 52 great-grandchildren, whatever this particular generation had 52 in it, and they were like, oh, that's useful. Let's cap that. These are going to be the 52 family designations that are going to serve. So that becomes calendar. That's why it's said that this particular family was the serving family. That's a calendar. So relevant to this man that everybody's obsessed with, this Jesus Christ guy, sort of failed Messiah, or he was a Mashiach ben Yosef. He might be she, Iska. Fudge a few more details here and there. We're attempting to correct the story. Why does everybody care? Well, whatever. There's some important stuff going on there. But anyway, that's the actual deal with the day. And so the first point of finding out why this is so important is taking away from what it is not. It's clearly not the December 25th story of a baby that's really about Horus and the 25th of December as a solar phenomena that happens at the winter equinox. So that is what it is not, and is not the spring solstice of Ishtar that becomes Easter. These are clearly not what that book is about. So whatever usefulness it does have, first of all, let's talk about what it isn't. That should be well known and well adapted to at this point, and yet it's not. So still have to say these very rudimentary things, these very rudimentary takeaways from a very Americanly steeped, ignorant Christian culture, ignorant of its own material, and for all the aforementioned reasons why people don't investigate things they believe they already know about. And that's definitely an aspect of the so-called Dunning-Kruger effect, where people believe that they're much smarter than they are, or they might just fall down all day or not be able to tie their shoes if they knew what their level of ignorance was positioning them at.
Right. We have to keep putting one foot in front of another.
Anyhow, I don't know that we remembered how we got on the name game.
No, but it's a good segment, and it'll stand independently.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It had some tie back to coming forward out of the statements about Buddhism and Siddhartha Bodhisattvas. Anyway, not establishing the twins as a Messiah, the son of Messiah Joseph effect, it led the rabbinate to assume that he was just a failed Messiah. And then the Catholic Church came along through Constantine and the Constantinianity, churchianity, and turned him into a god, and they definitely weren't happy with that. So that doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it's the Romans called Caesar my king and my God. And I've heard that's how Yeshua got the title.
Sure, because Constantine all at once became Jesus he was describing. He became Peter that he was basing it on. Interestingly enough, to enter into their world, in the world of statements that Joshua, the son of Joseph, made, or it's really a false name, and it was really Jessica, but that's for a different day. But whoever that individual is, the statements that were made to Peter. So people often look at Peter like he was the best disciple. He said, on this rock, I will build my congregation. No, he was not talking about the man. Because if you also look, he's the only man or the only individual in this collection that he said, Satan, get the F behind me. So yeah, he was the least of the bunch. It was just that in that moment, Peter, Petra, Kepha, Simon Peter, Shimon Kepha, he made a good statement. The statement was good. And he was, and the point that was being made was on this dynamic, on this dimension, on this thing that you have said, that's what our community is based upon. And the query, the query was, who do you say I am? Now, in the deeper things that I've discussed before, that wasn't Iska, and that wasn't Shimon, meaning the twins. That was the actual Mashiach ben David, who's constantly not named and conflated with this within this story. So there's a lot of things going on there, and they're said, but then they're supposed to confuse you. So that's talking to the real guy, who we could just call, I'd like to just call Michael for simplicity's sake. So Michael's standing there. Michael's actually talking to Peter. Michael's basically mislabeled Mary Magdalene through the entire thing. Mary Magdalene's the house of Eminem, the Archangel Michael. And the one they're calling Jesus, or Iska, that's a woman. And but there's an effect of twins, Simon and Jessica. So Mary and Joseph were good at having twins. They had Simon and Jessica. Jesus, Iska is a woman, Jessica, Iska, and Simon. And then they had Judah and Jacob. So they're the younger Judah and Jacob, the older Iska and Simon. It's like a cousin or something. Michael, who's over here, that's the actual Messiah ben David. It's not really Messiah ben David's time. He's just going around saying all the real things that need to be said to move the video game along. Meanwhile, what's actually going on is Iska and Simon, period. They're doing their thing. So Peter's being addressed by Michael at this moment, like, who do you say I am? So the Holy Spirit actually gets in Peter and he says, well, they say this, they say that, but I say that you're the Son of Man, meaning you're the actual guy who's capable of providing enough information to catalyze evolution of consciousness. You're the Son of Man, you're the Messiah, you're the Ishtadavata. And he says, on that point of not just saying it as a cerebral thing, as a concept, but on that perception, being able to perceive who is the guy with the information and the energy to move this thing forward, on that point of epiphany, will this community be built? Not on Peter. It's ridiculous. So Peter's the least of it, because Peter's the only guy that has to be said to him, get behind me, Satan. So not on Peter, but anyway, that's what went into Constantine's machination. He makes himself Petra, the rock, and Jesus himself in form, and takes those, becomes the first pope, and establishes the universal church, or the Kirk of Catholicism. So that's how all that becomes subverted and part of Constantine's machination. But he didn't just pop out of thin air. He built that on 250 years of Roman bishops over-asserting themselves in authority, 250 years of poets attempting to clean up the language, and then they kept playing a game of telephone with it. So there was a lot going on between the dropping of the body of the so-called Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, student of Gamliel, and Constantine. There's a whole bunch of circus clowns that happened for about 200 years leading up to Constantine going, aha, this is very useful to me. I can exploit this a lot. And then the Roman soldiers were out there, and it was part of their process, circulation and picking up. They were allowed to pick up religions and information and bring them back to Rome with them. It's kind of like in jail now. You can be a different religion officially every week. They want their soldiers to get out there and experience diversity and then bring it back to Rome. And they were allowed to explore in this way. And so a lot of these different ideas like classical Mithraisms or Zoroastrianism, just smaller, lesser developed paganities that were out there in Asia. They were in Asia Minor. They were bringing them back with them, and they're getting fused into the Roman, the more classical Roman religion of the Pontifex Maximus. Anyway, so you just examine the Catholic Church. You can go in Latin class and you can examine classical Roman religion. You're gonna be like, oh, this is the same thing. They have the Vestal Virgin, Pontifex Maximus. But the real underbelly of the whole thing is the unexamined notion of human guilt around sexuality. And why, without examining the notion, would it be better for the so-called Messiah or climactic human to be unengaged in procreative activity? It's kind of an odd thing that now it's so energized in the field. They're like, obviously being completely clean and sterile of sex would put you on a higher level. Like, really? Because you're completely untested. You're like, what? So in exceptional excuse making, this is the Christian standard unexamined mind space. Well, I mean, he's God, so that's his exception. Well, because you walk in clear of all the conditioning. Now you've got this dude, you've got this guy who's naked in a little diaper cloth, hanging on a cross. He's never been with a wife. He's never used his genitalia. He's never had to deal with his own children. How is that your leadership role model as a man? I mean, the amount of mind interference going on here is just extraordinary. That if you sit there and you reprise this and go, wait, that doesn't track. That doesn't track. So the most peak human of humans comes in here and doesn't get involved with procreative activity. Doesn't take a wife, doesn't have children, isn't battle tested. Interesting. But he's my role model because exceptionalism, exceptional thinking, magical, and psychological magic, not magic, not actual magic, but psychological, in the psychotherapeutic group, magical thinking. He's exceptional. He's God. So therefore, you give him a pass. He understands everything about me, and he didn't have to do those things. Naivety? Naivety much? No, that doesn't make any sense. So we find that Constantine changed a lot of things. You go back to older fragments of scriptures. Oh, so whatever was going on between this Michael, Jesse, all this situation, whoever the guy was, well, he had 90 wives, lots of children, because inherently being involved with sexuality is a testing ground. Can you do that in a pure way? Can you do that in a way that is pure? Can you lead with the masculine as the climactic apex of masculine humanity? But then you get these sterile pagan man god ideas coming in that are fossilized zombie demons, weird, decrepit mentalities. Like, well, honestly, if you're not involved with sex, you're just like, hi, like, why? It's an unexamined notion that pervades Christianity. That even out of Catholicism with the priest class, which is just the Roman class of priests, hierarchies, cardinals, bishops, and the pontiffs. They've got the Vestal Virgin, Mary, the Queen of Heaven. That's all Roman. But that aside, even in this Protestant Reformation, this Protestant attempt to clean that all up, even where the Messianic people, the Messianic so-called Jew Christians, they add the Hebrew roots back. They're still like with this notion, like, oh, he was just some woman just got some alien god sperm inside her, and clearly this is just better. Like, it's not part of human sin. It's like, well, I don't agree with the Catholics. At least the Catholics went, yeah, but but Mary. Well, the Catholics had a solution. Mary's uterus was the Immaculate Conception. It was something made before everything. It was like, that's ridiculous, but at least you have an answer. At least you accounted for the fact that doesn't really, well, it ought to be God's seed, because that way he's not part of man's original sin. There are there's some of these splinter groups, like in reading Seraph. Oh, there was a second Adam, a second seed that was just kept over here. And then it was just like, like, why does it have to be so weird? It's like, why are you guys on about this weird thing? And that may seem incidental, but no, the whole world is caught up in this story, whether they're, combating it maybe like in the Orthodox Torah world, or, they're not, they're just repeating it as, well, a lot of the world believes this, in the Muslim world, maybe in Russia or the Orthodox Church, but everybody's aware of it. So the idea that it's this NLP subliminal thing that's going on, like, oh, but this sterile, non-sexual God man, like, it's affecting everybody, and it's nonsense. Like, why do you have to be so weird? This is like this woman, Mary, and this man, Joseph, and they had some babies. And some of them turned out to be some important people. Or maybe it was somebody else who had some other guy who's walking Melchizedek, Enoch, Michael, this additional tier guy. But like in here, generally, people are born when a man and woman get together. It's not really a problem. You get the superhuman who's going to do a superhuman thing, but it has to be human. Like, it's just this weirdo element. They need to bring in this alien element, which is what should alert you to the fact that there's some AI subversion going on here from that Sitra Achra thing, or using their book, the Apostle Paul saying in Ephesians 6:8, not wrestling against flesh, but these principalities and powers, which are just like crooked mental ideas. Like, this doesn't make sense. Coming back to dictums of Kabbalah says everything is roots and branches. Which means everything functions just like the world we're perceiving and knowing about. And now we're back to that Maya and that delusion, or in Kabbalah, the Dimion, meaning we're in some sort of a holograph again here. Like, but everything, let's even back to that Jodie Foster movie, Contact, from the 90s. She goes through some giant scientific machinery, so some Einstein-Rosen bridge, some microtubal wormhole equipment, and comes out, and then she's just on an island with her deceased father. And she's like, and he's like, what? Did you assume it was going to be razzle dazzle, schmazzle? You're in. So it's like, this is just how it is. And the point of roots and branches, or the way that cinematography, in the cinema sense, that they're shrinking that, it's every step, you're still dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with. It's just like a hand, when you go in, it's like what a hand does. It grabs and moves. Like, we're dealing with this singular thing, which all at once makes it so much easier to come into the presence of, but it's also like staggering for people to let go of this idea that it's got to be some giant mystical, that's holding them back. So we keep loading these weirdo notions in here because there's this other thing. The Sitra Achra is this alien AI algorithmic nonsense machine that just puts the imagination of the mind at work over here. It's like, so we call it a failure of the imagination over here to be able to perceive something stable. It's not like busy with nonsense, all these nonsensical notions that the Sitra Achra is just like making this thing happen over here. It's like so preoccupied with all this. Yeah, my hand's doing it better than my mouth can say it. It's just like, it's just stimulating entertainment value that's just like stimulus that doesn't go anywhere. It's just like, it's not childlike, it's just childish. It's just immature little splintered notions that fragment, and they never be caught. And like over here, it's like, well, it's a failure of the imagination, or the mature use of the imagination to come into mental clarity. It's like, well, it seems boring once figured it all out. It's like, well, yeah, kind of. But no, because now you're at a place of maturity and arrival, and now you can actually let the light and bliss flow through you, and you're not just like, well, I want to forget again so I can remember. This is drugs, right? Drugs come in here too. Like, oh, I just want to be love and light, and I want to forget all the time so I can get the re-inspiration of constantly remembering. It's like, or you could just stop that. And then it's like, okay, so I know these things. Now I can build on those things. We could be shareable. We could have a shareable point of cognitive resolution where we're all like, okay, well, we know it's not, and it's not, and it's not. So it's about here. Can we refine that together? Can we dial that in? No, or you're just going to be out here doing this. Well, that looks a lot like the original centrifugal chaos that began this thing. It's like, yeah, this is so much fun. It's not. It's ultimately not, because it just generates instability, confusion, disorientation. And ultimately, then it's like over here, it's like sadness. And over here, it's like devastation from the entropy. I'm not sure if I'm still making any sense, any common sense at all, but I know what I'm saying. I'm just not sure if I completely left the ball field.
No, it's coherent. It's quite coherent. Thank you.
Anyway,
I need to go. I have to.
That's it. So, when this video is watched, then we'll, it'll be seen where we hiccup the needle on the record between somewhere between bodhisattvas and naming things strangely.
Well, I'll do a little bit of editing, I think.
I recommend epiphanic realization over thinking too much, because it usually just gets you in trouble. Probably just do it as it is. I'll just put it up on the YouTube channel and see if people like it. If you want a version that's edited later, broken down to smaller segments, we'll do that too. We'll make a clips channel. Isn't that what all the trendy people are doing now? They've got the channel, then there's the clips channel, and then there's the shorts. We'll be YouTube famous.
Good. I look forward to it.
I appreciate you being with us, Dr. Dave, and hopefully our engagement will bring about much elucidation and evolution in consciousness that all beings should become immediately free of suffering, and all souls should find their way home, because we are home, because we never left. We just became.
Amen. Amen.
We just became saturated with disorientation. And we're sitting in amnesia, but we never left, because every soul is existing only in the abode of the soul, because it's the only place the soul exists, in the abode of the soul. So we're Dorothy. We didn't actually leave Kansas. We just became psychotically detached. And you click the heels and there's no place like home. And suddenly you come out of this space that's Sheol, akin to a dream. And you realize you actually never left Kansas, because you can't leave Kansas. The abode of the soul is the abode of the soul. We can certainly make a mess of perception, and a mess that has consequences if we don't solve it quickly enough. And climb back up Alice's rabbit hole to the this park that her little bunch is picnicking at noon, the noonday sun. She becomes, well, anyway, analogies and metaphors, etc., etc.
Wow. Very good. All right, until next time.
May sanity prevail. Until then, Mukti, may we all achieve moksha. See you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.